I'm Dave Luvison. I'm the executive in residence with the Management and International Business Department at Loyola University, Maryland. And I am privileged to be able to have this conversation with one of our board members, Lou Kistner, to share career experiences and career advice with our students. We created these interviews because we realized that our board members had a lot of relevant and useful information about what's going on in today's business world that our students could learn from. So Lou, I want to thank you for joining us today and making some time to speak with the students and record this, this interview. Could you take just a minute and tell us a little bit about your background, kind of how you, went from various parts of your career through the rest of it?
Sure, Dave. Unlike career paths today, I have worked for 2 companies, and during my career, I'm now retired. And also after the 2 companies, for a number of years, I had my own consulting business. That probably is extraordinary given the circumstances for folks who are seeking a career today, where they must move more often than I had the a need to do during my career. I started my career in my working career in human relations, and during the latter part of my working career, I transferred into community and government relations activities, and also became the communications director for a major international chemical company.
Well, so, that you mentioned, kind of an atypical career given today's environment, right? I think the idea that we're in heavy industries like chemical and steel is really kind of fascinating at this day and age. That must be a pretty fascinating kind of industry to work in, isn't it?
I always wanted to work in manufacturing, not necessarily as a laborer, but in some role in manufacturing. So I was particularly interested in moving to, even beginning my career, to moving to a company that actually made something rather than a service type of activity. So that intrigued me. And so that's where I focused my career in that area. And I was fortunate enough that I was able to work for 2 large companies, one a steel company and the other a chemical company during my active business career.
That's great. That's great. Well, one of the things we wanted to talk with you about was kind of international business. I know you're going to tell us a little bit about some of your experiences there. Our students are going through an interesting time right now, right? Loyola has a pretty robust study abroad program, but because of the pandemic, those have been essentially shut down. And I think our students are experiencing loss on a lot of levels, about not being able to go abroad, not being able to sample another culture. And even though they're not necessarily working in that culture, they are, missing out on some of those fundamental experiences that would enable them to feel more comfortable in thinking about a business, a career rather in international business. What would some of the differences of dealing internationally, I mean, outside of the travel and all that, I mean, in terms of whether it's culture or whether it's, the way they do things, what were some of the big differences you noticed that dealing internationally versus, say, dealing with a domestic group?
What I found, which was also interesting to me, was that in most cases, wherever I traveled, the key people at our facilities, and also people like the receptionist and et cetera at the local hotels, spoke very good English. So you weren't compelled to learn a foreign language in order to communicate with the key people at our facilities overseas, nor as you were traveling, whether you had to learn the language in order to get a hotel room. But however, once you got outside the hotel, if you wanted to travel by taxi, or you wanted to go to a local restaurant, etc., then you did need to have the language skills that you could do that successfully and not embarrass your hosts, colleagues, or yourself. So those things were I had an opportunity, or actually I had a requirement once where I was in London and I needed to call our president who was in Beijing. And it was amazing that the person who answered the phone at the hotel responded to me in perfect English. It was, again, an example. But I think you have to get beyond that and really learn the language in order to have social interactions and do things outside of just the interactions with your business partners who, like I say, largely, with few exceptions, speak perfect English. I would encourage folks looking at international business activities or as a career to learn a foreign language, and maybe one of the Romance languages where that can be interposed with, if you learn French, it's easier to learn the other Romance languages like Italian and Spanish and Portuguese, although there are obviously differences among them. And also the history and culture learn about the history and culture of the companies that you're working with, and also maybe companies that you're having other interactions with that aren't part of your corporation, because that gives you the opportunity to show that you're sensitive to that culture and to that area. I think it's important because it gives you that entree so that it's not a very stiff conversation between yourself and colleagues and customers and trade press, where you have some sense of how that area came to be, what their history is, not only their history, but what are the things that are important to them, so that you can comment on these things in a social way and show your affinity for that area.
You know, that's great advice, you know, particularly given that our students can't travel abroad right now. Certainly the study abroad program is on hiatus. But those are things they can be doing now to kind of bolster themselves, right? I mean, they can be reading about international business. They can be, you know, studying a language. They can be, you know, trying to show that they haven't just been dormant during this time, right? They've actually acquired some of those things. Because as you point out, a lot of that social interaction, just the effect that you try to speak a language, even if you don't have to do it perfectly, right? Because they're going to speak English most of the time anyway, but your business colleagues. But, you know, that just shows a real, you know, desire to try to understand their culture and actually try to connect with them.
With only one exception, when I was in France, the opportunities I took to speak the language, and I guess that's the important thing. You just not only have to be able to know the language, but you have to kind of get together and actually speak it, even though you know you may make mistakes, but you can't learn a language without really forcing yourself to speak it, even though it may be awkward for you to do it. By and large, with only one exception that I can recall, when I attempted to speak French, either in Paris, Le Havre, or in Alsace, people were most helpful and very positive about my having at least tried to express myself in their language, and even in Paris, where, you know, the view is that the Parisians are very much anti-American, and particularly in terms of language, that we don't speak it correctly. But I found that it did work for me. And also I had the opportunity of being personally trained in both French and in Brazilian Portuguese when we acquired the operations in those two countries.
Yeah, I've found that same thing. I am very bad with languages. I was never that well trained on languages, but I found that when I was in Paris, for instance, my futile attempts at French actually, you know, were well received, you know, by waiters and people that are often viewed as gruff. So Lou, this has been great. Maybe as a kind of a wrap up, what, you know, kind of advice would you share with students, particularly, you know, those thinking about a career in international business? What kinds of things would you advise them to do? Obviously, learning a language sounds like something, but what things would you recommend they do?
Well, I think internships for student level, I think internships can be critical, obviously, not only to getting experience, but also preparing for a career potentially a career with a company. So I would encourage students to find internships with an international business. Two that come to mind locally are McCormick's and W.R. Grace, which both have their global headquarters here in Maryland, and they have operations obviously around the world. And that's getting an internship with a company, with companies like that, and ideally having an internship that involves working with the company's international operations and going to one of their international operations, I think can be a real asset. If not with that particular company, as a background for seeking a career with another international company. I know one of the challenges today is the fact that with the pandemic, everything is being done electronically. And I think that's going to curtail to some degree, and maybe a great degree, of the opportunity to actually do international business travel personally. Whereas I think much of that, to the extent it can be done, will be done electronically. But nonetheless, I think I found it exciting, rewarding, and I'm very happy to have had that as part of my career, that I was involved personally, directly, and in a significant way in the international business of the chemical company I worked for 2 decades.
Well, it certainly sounds like it, Lou, and it sounds like your fulfilling life has a lot of good lessons for our students. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview and sharing your experiences. I think you've given our students a lot to think about, whether it's how quickly they have to learn how to pack, or how they should really comport themselves when they're dealing socially with some of the people in international business. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, as it always is. And I want to thank you very much for making the time. Thank you.
Not a problem. And if there are any specifics that any of the students might want to learn more about, I'd be happy to try to respond.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lou. We appreciate it.